and welcome to the LA Venture Podcast. This is Minnie Ingersoll, host of the podcast and partner at TenOneTen. TenOneTen is a seed stage fund here in LA. All opinions expressed on this show by me and my guests are solely our own. Today's guest is Scott Lenet, co-founder and president of Touchdown Ventures. Touchdown helps corporations run professional venture capital programs. Scott has 2 decades of experience as a VC. Before Touchdown, Scott was a managing partner at DFJ Frontier. Scott, I have so much I want to talk about today. Thanks for coming on the pod.
Thanks for having me, Minnie.
Well, first, just let's start with you telling me a little bit more about running professional venture capital on behalf of corporations.
Where to start? So to me, there's been a real evolution about how entrepreneurs and other venture capitalists think about corporate venture over the years. Do you have any conceptions off the top of your head when you think about corporate venture? Good, bad, neutral?
Yeah, no, kind of negative-ish.
Right? So I had an experience after we had started DFJ Frontier where I had the opportunity to co-invest with Intel Capital. And the partners at, the D, the F, and the J in Frontier, Tim Draper, John Fisher, and Steve Jurvetson, all said, don't do it. Like an idiot, I didn't listen to them. And I co-invested with Intel Capital because I liked the partner that was on the deal. And we wanted to do this deal together. And it turned out to be a really good experience. And this was in the early 2000s. At that time period, where the dominant narrative was strategics can really be bad. That strategic, in fact, was a dirty word. Mm-hmm. And I think that, sort of 15 years later, we're all still dealing somewhat with the hangover of this reputation. The mentality was, as traditional venture investors, we have a financial discipline to pursue. And that the only way that everyone involved succeeds if the startup grows up, goes public, or gets sold. And that's when the entrepreneur makes money, and that's when the investors make money. It's when the employees make money. And that's the goal of these startups in the venture industry. And so the notion was that corporations have a strategic objective and that they might pursue that at the exclusion or to the detriment of the financial objectives of everybody else. But there's been an evolution. And the evolution is that everyone has learned more about venture capital and how it works, angels, corporations, and that in fact, strategic doesn't have to be a dirty word. Strategic can actually be a plus. That in fact, the two should go together. That strategic value could actually improve the financial outcome. So one of the good experiences I had was with the person who became my co-founder at Touchdown, David Horowitz. David was one of the early team members at Comcast Ventures. He was a co-founder there. So I had done a Series A investment and David did the next round. And so we served on that board together for 6 years. And so I had my positive experience with Intel Capital, and then I had a really positive experience with David at Comcast.
If I think of who I think has a strong reputation for doing corporate venture capital, it would probably be, I would have named Intel and Comcast.
Well, and that wasn't always the case for Intel. There was a time period where Intel specifically ran the risk of interfering with the exit of a startup, that reputation then spread out to all of corporate venture. They obviously weren't the only ones, but as one of the very early players in corporate venture, they were feeling their way around for, how to practice this business. So when Arvind Sadani took over Intel Capital, he had a very deliberate approach, which is to say, we are going to be strong financial investors. And he went, made the rounds in Silicon Valley and said, we're just like you. We are going to act just like you. We're going to follow the same incentive systems as you, and you can trust us that we're a partner you can count on. And in my opinion, it probably took a half a decade or a decade in order to build that confidence in the traditional VC community. And so there was this debate that started emerging, which said, you have to choose as a corporation, should you be strategic or should you be financial? Which it really doesn't make sense if you think about it.
But still, today, people ask all the time, are you strategic? Are you financial?
Right. That has become, a dominant decision that corporations think they have to make. And to me, asking that as an or is the wrong way to phrase the question. It's how are you strategic and financial?
That makes sense. But still, as a founder, I still think there's some hesitation about having a corporate as your lead.
So I think that's a natural fear. But in fact, we've seen that in corporate venture programs, there's this weird stat that's a little bit scary, which is the average corporate venture capital fund, the CVC, gets shut down in 4 years.
Wow.
And so, we know that a venture deal takes 6 to 7 years on average to return capital. So that math is bad. Even venture capitalists can do that math, be like, no, 6 is more than 4. What's going wrong that these programs are being shut down? And so it turns out there's a single stat that is most correlated with the longevity of the program. And it's whether the people involved who are running it inside the corporation have prior venture experience.
Right. But so they shut down, and I, as an entrepreneur, am worried about that. I think the things I worry about are that corporate corporate venture capital, they don't hold reserves, or they might shut down. Same sort of
Yes.
issue, and that they sort of move slow.
Yes.
And potentially there's some conflict with competitors who might
Sure.
not want to invest. So tell me why I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right. I think those are all issues that are, that as an institutional VC, I've had all of them, every single one you just named. We have to work every day to make sure that those are not problems that then become a hassle for the entrepreneur or for our co-investors. I mean, the reality is corporations are big, they're complicated. CEOs turnover, what's the average lifespan of a CEO in a Fortune 500 company? I think it's between 5 and 7 years, somewhere in that time frame. So the odds are good sometime during the life of an investment, a significant portion of management is going to turn over. There are going to be reorgs and things like that, changing priorities. A deal that was strategic might no longer be strategic. And the first thing that you mentioned is, do you even have reserves? I think this goes back to the point of, are you running your venture capital effort the way a traditional VC would? We all set up our funds. We build a portfolio model. We build reserves for each deal. And, many CVCs just haven't even thought about that. They say, oh, wait, you have to have reserves? So when we at Touchdown, sort of go to work helping a corporation launch and then, manage their program, it's one of the first conversations is you need to understand what reserves are and that this is a norm in the industry. And the expectation is that unless we very clearly say so at the beginning that we're not going to do more, that we will probably be doing more. So we try to do all of this infrastructure building and expectation setting as part of helping a corporation launch the program.
So great. So I'm an entrepreneur and I'm coming to you. One, I will ask you about the reserves. How else? Tell me more about, do I need to know all the corporations that you represent? Do I sort of come to you, or do you find the entrepreneurs usually?
It varies. So, I mean, we look at about 5,000 deals a year. Team member number 45 just signed his paperwork last week, and hopefully that number continues to grow. We should talk about how our model differs from a traditional pooled vehicle in venture capital. But every time we add a new corporate partner, we add team members at Touchdown, which is a little bit different. We are hiring, and so I definitely would love to put a plug out there. We have a talent page on our website, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners are interested in jobs in the industry, and we're trying to create as many of them as we can at a reasonable pace. Our corporate partners actually generate some of the deal flow, in which case that entrepreneur knows that if we're running the program together with 20th Century Fox or Kellogg's or Scotts Miracle-Gro or T-Mobile, or you name the program, that if it came in that way, they know that it's a program that we're running. If they come in directly to Touchdown or we're reaching out, it's probably going to be tied to the sector they're in.
Yeah, but it was interesting. I asked Selena, I was like, Selena, who works at Touchdown, and I said something like, well, I've got this great deal. Like, how do I know if it's going to be a fit for one of your corporate partners? And she's like, just assume it is. Like, I'll help you route to the right person.
If you go on our website, we have a sector theme or focus areas page that lists all the current mandates, and you go through them. It's kind of almost everything that you would, that a venture capitalist might be interested in. And so we're in healthcare, we're in media, we're in consumer products, we're in food and agriculture and security, enterprise software. There's really nothing that we don't touch. It doesn't mean that the deal will necessarily be a match, because the mandates are actually developed pretty strictly.
So you have a separate team for each one of these corporate partnerships. Does that mean, headcount-wise, are you one of the largest funds in LA?
Well, not all of our team members are in LA. So we also have an office in San Francisco, and we've got an office on the East Coast outside Philadelphia. So I don't think we have the most people in venture capital in LA, but a couple of years from now, I would be surprised if we don't have 100 people at the firm. And probably we've opened up another office somewhere or two. And so we generally raise 3 to 4 new funds every year. It's just that they're not pooled vehicles. Each corporation has its own sole account. So when we do that, we have to add new team members. So the idea that this is this growing beast. My co-founders and I joke around and say, yes, we're a corporate venture capital and innovation firm first, but close second, we're a recruiting and training firm. And that if you said, what's your greatest pride weakness? It's probably that we believe that, we could be among the best in the world, if not the best in the world, at training the next generation of VCs.
Let's stay there for a second. We can come back to corporate innovation, that sort of thing. But talk to me about, what did you call it? A growing beast, I think.
Yeah.
Tell me about growing this next generation and, what we can all learn about hiring our own associates and how we can train them.
Yeah, look, I think it takes an emphasis and a mindset about being educators. And I think that there's a lot of hypocrisy in the venture industry. The line that people use is, oh, this is an apprenticeship business. And then you say, how is it possibly an apprenticeship business? Apprenticeship does not mean, hey, kid, I'm throwing you in the pool, and if you can swim, you live. And that's kind of how we do it in venture.
Right.
And, you've seen in some of the stuff that I've written, I'm actually a believer that we probably need a little bit more oversight and regulation in this business, which is not a popular thing for a venture capitalist to say, where, capitalist is in the job title, and that implies free markets and just, go do whatever. And my dad had an analogy. I remember, being a little bit rebellious is probably not the right word, because I don't think I was ever really rebellious. But there were some times as a teenager where I would say, I want to do this, and, it's my decision. And he would say, kind of, if I see you walking out in traffic on the freeway and a semi truck is coming along, I'm going to grab you by the back of the collar and I'm going to yank you back out of the way and pull you off that freeway. And that always stuck with me as, he said, I'm your dad. It's my prerogative to do that. It's my job to keep you safe. And I think that that should apply to what our entrepreneurs do at their businesses and our job to protect them as well as our junior people. And this is a business where we're professional fiduciaries for other people's money. And it's something that if you didn't raise that money yourself, you may not feel that full sense of obligation to the people who are your limited partners. And, we should feel really lucky to be in the business and to be investing other people's money, but there's no training. You can't get a degree in venture capital. There's no competency test. There's no continuing education. There's no certification. We could say, well, is there a role for thinking about what do we do as VCs? And are we helping society or hurting society? There was a whole television show on HBO, Silicon Valley, making fun of us for saying, we're making the world a better place by doing X. And I think that what makes that funny is that the intention is probably authentic. And are we deluding ourselves into thinking we're actually making the world a better place? That's the question I think we should be introspective about.
Okay, so the apprenticeship thing is, now that you pointed out, it sounds ridiculous because we all know that we don't actually spend much time training our junior people. What have you seen that's really been useful for you? What can I learn when I go and hire my next one person over the next 3 years?
Yeah. So, well, we built a lot of training systems. As the pandemic ramped up, we said every Friday morning, we're going to have a training session. And we started, building more and more training modules. When we have new people start, we run them through an orientation program we call Touchdown 101. And this is one of the reasons why I teach. I've been teaching venture capital 20 years at this point, and that really becomes a laboratory for me to develop curriculum that we can use with our internal training. And especially for recent college grads or recent MBAs, they still have that school mindset of what's the combination of practical learning, things that you could teach me or tell me from war stories, together with frameworks that I can use to remember, because that's, how we teach you in school. And so I think it's a blend of those two things.
Are there any particularly really good ones that can be summarized on a podcast, like a great framework that you think has been really impactful that you've taught, or a great war story that you tell every year or something?
Yeah. There's one that at a high level, and everyone makes fun of us in the firm because we named the company Touchdown. And we love sports analogies. But there's a metaphor in baseball. It's the myth of the 5-tool player. And the idea is that this is how general managers selecting baseball players used to pick their teams. And I don't even remember off the top of my head what they all were, but it was like hitting, fielding, throwing and running or something like that.
Yeah.
And so, I started thinking about that analogy and said, well, there's 5 tools in venture capital, not counting raising the fund. You need to source, you need to diligence, you need to transact, you need to manage the deal, and you need to exit the deal. And if you think about it, you can't do a deal that you don't see.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't do a deal that you haven't validated that at a particular price on particular terms is going to be a winner financially. If you've done that work, you found the deal and you've done the diligence, you have to be able to get that deal done.
Mm-hmm.
Those 3 are the easy part. So, all of those things combined are less time than now I'm managing the deal. And in venture capital, there's a wide range of what does it mean to manage. It could be, okay, I'll pick up the phone when the entrepreneur calls and try to be helpful. Or it could be I'm on the board and I'm really working hard. And you could do all of that. And if there's no positive exit, you haven't returned capital. And so venture capitalists have a role to play in helping make sure that the exit is a good one.
Okay, so you're teaching how to be a VC, how to help startups, and corporate innovation. 2 separate classes?
Well, yeah, I teach how to be a venture capitalist at USC and corporate innovation at UCLA, both in the MBA programs.
And I think you mentioned to me that there's 100 new CVCs a year being started, something like that?
Typically every year.
How many get shut down every year?
Well, I guess if the math averages are right, it's, probably 25.
So yeah, maybe same sort of question, which is what are you teaching in corporate innovation and sort of how does corporate innovation and venture capital fit together?
Yeah, so they really have to fit together or it's, I think, toxic to the corporate environment and for the entrepreneurs as well. And we've seen this firsthand. So, imagine you're an entrepreneur and someone from a corporation comes to you and says, hey, we have a corporate venture fund. We might like to invest. Let's talk. And you are also hearing from someone on the corporate development team who works in M&A. Oh, we'd like to buy your company. Let's talk. You're also hearing from someone in a business unit. We'd like to do a commercial deal with your company. Let's talk. Your first reaction is going to be, oh my God, do these people talk to each other?
Right. No, they don't.
The worst of all of those is, oh, we're having one of these 3 conversations or more. Turns out someone in R&D is working on a competitive product.
Right.
We just had these conversations and now they're competing with me.
Mm-hmm.
So when I first started teaching, I actually started teaching a class on entrepreneurship with a venture capital lens. So there weren't as many jobs being created at venture. Venture wasn't as well understood. And at the time, my evaluation was very few of these people are ever going to work in venture capital. Some of them might go work at CalPERS or CalSTRS, the pension funds, and many of them were going to become entrepreneurs. And so my class was about if you wanted to go be an entrepreneur, it would be really helpful to understand what is venture capital, how are VCs motivated, so that when you get your first term sheet, this is an equal conversation and you're not so intimidated that it's a bad experience. When I moved to LA, and I started teaching at USC, I was teaching that same class. At a certain point, it flipped. And I actually came to the perspective that said, many of these people are going to work in venture capital. Maybe they have family offices where they're already doing deals or they're going to be making angel investments themselves. And just as many of them might wind up as investors as they would be entrepreneurs. And so I said, well, let me flip the class and actually teach it from the perspective of how to be a venture capitalist. And Selena's teaching that class now. One of my proudest accomplishments is she started as my student in that first class that I described, and now she's teaching without me as an adjunct.
That's awesome.
And so, which again, I think goes back to that idea of, what do we mean by mentorship and apprenticeship?
So what have you learned teaching this class or running this fund? What has surprised you about corporate venture?
So when we started Touchdown, we thought, I think a little bit naively, that the motivation for most of these corporations was they wanted a corporate venture function because that's what they were telling us. They were saying, help me start and run my corporate venture fund. But a few years in with that experience, what we realized is that those were the more sophisticated groups and that what was underneath it that was driving that motivation was that they wanted access to external innovation. They now realize, most of them, that they can't do everything themselves. And the old model was not invented here. I'm going to build it myself. I don't care what the outside world is doing. Now that the world of venture capital has created a pool of innovators, and for any one innovation, maybe it's 25 or 50 or 100 external innovators who are working on the same problem, the chances that the corporation has the shot at being the best in the world at doing it are going down. So these corporations are saying, I want access to external innovation, and venture capital is one of the tools to give it to them, but it's not the only one. So the notion is, if you're an MBA, maybe you're going to be an entrepreneur, maybe you're going to be a venture capitalist, maybe you're going to go work in M&A, maybe you're going to work in business development, which of all of them is probably the most likely, sort of that's the role in innovation that a lot of MBAs wind up in.
Are there any misconceptions that you think a lot of your students have about any of those roles?
It's funny. I think every year the students get more sophisticated and smarter, which is fun because it keeps us on our toes as professors to keep the material fresh and to keep advancing the state of the dialogue. When I first started coming to LA, I remember there was an event for an organization you probably know called Lava. And just to get a sense for the audience, I asked, how many people here know what stock options are? This is probably in 2003 or 2004, something like that. I don't know, maybe, less than half the room raised their hand. If you ask that question today, there's no chance that, anyone would be like, no, I don't know what stock options are.
2003 does not seem that long ago to me, but I think I'm just getting older. Legitimate question. Do you have any advice for VCs who are working with corporates?
Yeah, I think one of the other things that you mentioned is the recognition that corporations are big and they can be slow. And so, the Chinese proverb that the best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago, and the second best time is today. And so to me, what that means is start early. If you know that these are organizations that have more coordination to accomplish, and that the deal will be better if you validated it with someone in a business unit or who is running a P&L. Don't wait to do that. Don't show up and say, I've got this deal, you've got a week to decide. And that's what we've trained entrepreneurs to do to us. But if you do that to a corporation, you're probably going to get a bad result.
Yeah. Let's stay on sort of that evolving nature of, everyone knows what stock options are. So you had this multi-decade, I don't want to say like multi-decade, but couple decades.
It's okay.
In venture capital. So DFJ Frontier, what were some of your lessons learned there? What were the things you're like, I want to replicate that, I don't want to replicate that?
Yeah. And I'm still active in DFJ Frontier, by the way. Most of my time is spent on Touchdown, but David Kremen and Frank Foster and I still run DFJ Frontier Funds 1 and 2 together. I love those guys. It's a great partnership. Definitely, there are some lessons. Our strategy for that first fund were a lot of tech transfer deals out of university that were seed stage investments in California outside Silicon Valley. They took a long time. And so we did a lot of hard science deals that I personally enjoyed, that I bet you would like, knowing your background. And, those deals take a while. We had patient capital in the form of institutional investors, but still there's a limit to patience. And so, I might have thought about that strategy a little bit differently today.
Would you still want to invest in hard science? Let's say, would you come in a little later rather than sort of spinning out of university?
Maybe. I still think that there's a role for tech transfer type deals. And, the question is, what is available to help accelerate the growth of that startup once the commercial potential has been identified, which is one of, half a dozen things that has pushed my career in the direction of corporate venture. We work with Avery Dennison, which is a material science company. We do hard science deals, but Avery Dennison, through its operating units, has the ability to help accelerate the growth of those startups.
Anything else sort of related either to DFJ Frontier or just generally how things have evolved and how you see it evolving?
Yeah, well, you asked the question, what else would I do the same? And I think that for me, part of the attraction of DFJ Frontier was the vision of the DFJ network. And Tim really came up with this idea of, we used to joke around and say, he wanted a venture capital fund on every corner. It was like, if there was a minor or major league baseball team in that town, probably it needed a venture capital fund. What was interesting about that was not the idea that we should proliferate VC, but that by having a network, we could help each other and that we could help the entrepreneurs better. And the whole thing ultimately went into another direction. And still, to this day, Tim runs it as something called the Draper Network. But I think that concept of how can a network be valuable to help your portfolio company succeed really stuck with me. I think you could look at firms today like Andreessen Horowitz, which has clearly been innovative in hiring all of those operating partners to say, you're going to work on building value in the portfolio. And I think that for us at Touchdown, we think similarly. We work with, I think today the number is probably something like 17 or 18 different corporations. The number of people that we work with directly inside our corporate partners is probably another 400 or so people that we're regularly interacting with.
I like that concept. We should all be building that network here in LA. Any other thoughts on where you think growth will or won't be in the industry?
We have a whole generation of venture capitalists who've never really been through a downturn. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens when that hits. I don't imagine that the dollars at work in the business are going to decline where they go so far backwards that this business shrinks. So the question is, how much more can it grow? How much capital is there on the planet for this? Who are those limited partners? And the institutional, limited partners, the pension funds and the endowments are only going to put so much money in the business. We have, sort of sovereigns that have jumped into the business. They're only going to do so much at a certain point. Wealth creation can only increase at a certain rate. So you say, well, as it matures, how does it consolidate? How does it reshape? There's no Goldman Sachs of venture capital. And most of the firms, most of the truly excellent firms in the business, I think if you looked at it, you would say these are very successful large boutiques. They're not corporate entities themselves. So that could happen.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, you've clearly found a model that seems to be working extremely well. And I look forward to following along with the continued growth as you get to 100 people at Touchdown.
Same here. I look forward to doing some co-investments together and hopefully helping some startups.
Real quick, it would be great if you could spare a moment to give the podcast 5 stars or share with a friend. Or I love getting emails. Send me a note, minnie@TenOneTen.net. Thanks.